The Lowdown, Audio Downloads for Life. The Lowdown, a short history of the origins of the Vietnam War, written by David L. Anderson and presented by Lorelei King. Chapter 1. Why the Vietnam War Matters. Part 1. A Vietnamese Jefferson or a Vietnamese Lenin? All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. First penned in 1776 by the American revolutionary Thomas Jefferson, as the American colonists proclaimed their independence from the mighty British Empire, these stirring words are also the opening salvo of the Vietnamese Declaration of Independence. Standing on a platform festooned with red flags and paper lanterns in Ba Ding Square, a tree-shaded public park in Hanoi, the veteran Vietnamese revolutionary Ho Chi Minh, with penetrating eyes and a disarming wispy goatee, boldly proclaimed his country's independence on September 2, 1945. Just as Americans had done almost 2 centuries earlier in defiance of the British, the 55-year-old Ho declared that Vietnamese patriots were, after many decades of French domination, affirming that all the peoples on the earth are equal from birth and have a right to live and to be happy and free. Among the cheering Vietnamese assembled for this auspicious announcement were American military officers who had worked with Ho and his Viet Minh political front to defeat the Japanese imperial forces that had occupied Indochina and had replaced French authority for the previous 4 years. Envisioning this dramatic scene and not knowing the tragic saga that would follow, someone might assume that the Americans and Vietnamese had much in common on which to build a harmonious international relationship. In reality, however, the two nations were destined to collide in one of the major 20th century wars that would ultimately cost more than 2 million Vietnamese and more than 58,000 American lives. How could it have happened? That there was trouble ahead should have been apparent. In contrast to the festive and hopeful atmosphere in Hanoi on that warm Sunday in September, the day turned violent and deadly in Saigon, another French colonial center about 600 miles south of Hanoi. Hundreds of Vietnamese gathered in the city center to listen to Ho's address on the radio and to cheer independence. As the boisterous crowd paraded down the Rue Catinat, a major shopping street, small arms fire targeted the revelers near the cathedral. A melee ensued as young Vietnamese broke into buildings hunting snipers, looted shops, and beat up Europeans. A stray bullet killed a French priest standing on the steps of the cathedral, and by the end of the day, 3 other people were dead and hundreds had been injured. Obviously, there were serious disagreements about the future direction of Vietnam. Uncle Ho and his Viet Minh Front inspired many Vietnamese who had suffered political and economic oppression under French rule. French merchants, plantation owners, and government officials did not want to relinquish the economic and social perks of colonial control that they enjoyed. Caught between the revolutionaries and the colonialists, Vietnamese, from peasant farmers to urban entrepreneurs, would be forced into joining one side or the other in this clash. Far from the boulevards of Hanoi and Saigon, and the sweltering rice paddies and rubber plantations of rural Vietnam, other powerful conflicting forces were also shaping this emerging conflict. In wood-paneled, high-ceilinged offices in Washington, Paris, Moscow, and other world capitals, government officials were making decisions on how the future of French Indochina played into the interests of their own countries. During World War II, Nazi occupation and France's loss of control of its Southeast Asian colony to the Japanese had dealt a blow to French pride and profits that Paris now intended to remedy by reclaiming its prized Oriental possession. Leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union, allied nations during the war, warily watched each other in an emerging Cold War and constantly made their own global strategic calculations. Neither of these powerful nations had a colonial interest in Indochina, and both, in fact, claimed that they desired an end to Western colonialism in Asia. Neither could ignore, however, the value of the harbors, resources, and markets of Southeast Asia to itself or its allies in defense of its own international security. The global confrontation between the conflicting interests and ideologies of the United States and the USSR that dominated world affairs for the second half of the 20th century decisively steered the course of the Vietnamese struggle.